Welcome to Think Governance, where we dive into critical questions in the boardroom and share insights on what makes a board more effective and impactful. Think Governance, empowering leadership, igniting change.
Thank you very much. And what a privilege of being here today with esteemed speakers like we've got. So I would like to welcome each and every one of you. And I'm going to give each panelist a 5-minute opportunity to provide their insights and set the tone for the discussions today. Shall I start with you, Professor? So then we work around to the end.
So good governance is probably bang in the middle of no more than 5 things that we ought to be doing as a people with great natural endowments. I think the first is to ensure that there's this notion of resilience in the long term, whilst to ensure that we're building sustainable companies in the short term, to ensure that this economy looks like us. So number one will be transformation, and it doesn't matter how unpopular it sounds, because if the majority of the people in this country don't have something to lose, then they will ban it just to prove a point. The second is this notion of ethical leadership, because when you have ethical leadership, they don't steal from the mouths of the babies, the sick and the dying. The third, of course, is good governance, because good cooperative governance ensures the separation of ownership on the one hand from control on the other. The penultimate one, it's about service delivery, because whether you're a business or an NGO or even a government, it's about, in the ultimate end, how we are servicing our customers. In this country, the customers are the citizens in a country where the infrastructure is actually collapsing. The last one is law and order, safety and security, because without it, who are we and what are we? Steinhoff would not have happened if we didn't have a superstar CEO who the board felt they couldn't challenge because they were walking in awe rather than holding him finally accountable. You look at that board, it's a rock star board of people who have run some very successful companies, and yet here, monumental failure. It's about the big 4 now, the big 5 accounting firms who look at these figures. When do you buy a company at 50? Before the end of 6 months, you say, no, we now want to revalue it at 150, and they let it pass. Lastly, it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have a culture that says it's okay to be greedy, to be preoccupied with me, myself, I, not what the Japanese tell us, that before you become a millionaire, make somebody else a millionaire. It sounds counterintuitive, but people are amassing for themselves that which is more than they need, even if they had 3 lifetimes. Let me end by saying, but what type of culture has enabled this not only to occur, but to continue? And many years later, there are still no consequences. The culture that says you've got an 80% chance to bribe, steal, and cheat, and you'll get away with it. It's better than playing the lotto. One day when we wake up and say, how did we get to be here? Where if wealth is the inevitable outcome of both hard work and enterprise, then every woman should be a dollar billionaire. Thank you.
I was not surprised when you start off by talking about leadership and transformation, because when I looked at your CV, one of the sentences is he's passionate about, amongst them, leadership, transformation, social justice. So it's quite clear from what you've said that you live that, you believe in it, and you drive that. So not sure whether you've seen the building that we are using. how that actually interlinks with today's theme or the discussion for today. Steinhoff as an organization was actually started as a furniture organization, selling cheap, quality furniture at discounted prices.
Makes sense.
And it evolved over the years into a international, I also almost want to say monster, massive. 130,000 employees, over 30 countries, and it really grew from strength to strength. And you made mention of Marcus Jooste. He became first CEO, I think, of Gamma Gamma at age 27. That was still young. Now, walking into this building and seeing Aesop's and all these other furniture businesses, it just feels right talking about Steinhoff. So, Parmi, over to you.
Thank you, Jaco. So there are two, I think, key points that I wanted to start us off with, just thinking about. The one is around the governance ecosystem. So I was thinking on my way here in the car that if someone steals something, once off, they steal a physical item and no one sees them, and there's no cameras, it's pretty difficult. It's plausible to believe that no one could find out, let's say. But the extent and also the duration of what happened at Steinhoff, it's absolutely implausible to me that a whole lot of role players in the governance ecosystem didn't know what was going on. So for me, they were either, one, complicit in what was going on, or two, they turned a blind eye. And when I talk about the governance ecosystem, yes, we talk a lot about the boards of directors, and I'm sure I'm going to get questions about that. The board and the committees, for example, the audit committee and their role, etc. We talk about management. And I mean, yeah, we know CEO and CFO, there've even been legal proceedings against them. But what about all the divisions in the business that are meant to be checking certain things? You know, governance and business is all about checks and balances. So you have risk, you have a whole risk management function. You have compliance, you have finance, you have internal audit. Every single one of those groups of people would have seen signs that something wasn't right. And I want to extend that a little bit because I think there's also a sense that the buck stops with the board. And I want to also extend that to say, what role do the shareholders play? Because the shareholders ultimately appoint the board of directors. And surely there needs to be some accountability there as well. We can all sit back and say, well, this board perhaps wasn't independent, etc. But who approved them at those AGMs? It was the shareholders. When you appoint boards, you're appointing a group of people and you're entrusting them to look after the interests of this organization, in the best interest of this organization. And then that's a really serious responsibility on the part of shareholders. My sense when I attend AGMs is the director vote just gets passed. Whoever management put forward to be voted onto the board, they get voted onto the board. I don't see a lot of discussion and engagement and questions around track record, tenure, independence, all sorts of things. There's a lot of engagement around remuneration and other things at AGMs, but not as much as I think we should have around the appointment of directors. Then the second point is around King 4. When things like this happen, the natural question that comes out is, well, what was the point of having King 4 if these things are still going to happen? But King 4 is words on a page, like any piece of legislation. It's like, I make the analogy that murder is against the law, but people are still murdering other people. Regardless of what it says, it needs human beings to bring it to life and to action it in a very, in the way that it was intended. And I think that's often where we find the flaws or the gaps is King 4 can say whatever it wants. It can say all these great things, but if humans don't buy into it and practice it, I think that's when we see things like this happening. So yeah, those are my introductory comments. Thanks, Jaco.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that you made mention about shareholders. You've added another question to your portion. Because one need to ask the question, the board members, those involved. Visa was one of the main shareholders, but he was also sitting on the board. And what's the influence that you've got at that level? I agree 100% that the organization, not once, but multiple years, indicated that they abide by the King 3 principles. Now, if you want to go out and you want to promote yourself as your organization as being King compliant, then surely you should meet all the aspects that relates to that. And that's a question I've usually or regularly asked at King committee meetings as well. You would know because we sit on there. So Parmi is deeply involved in shaping governance and standards. And from this, your intro, it's quite clear that you are actively involved at all levels. And I look forward to a robust discussion on that. Thanks very much, Parmi. Shall we move over to Madelie?
Sure. So when I think of fraud, you immediately think of state capture. And we do not often think of fraud in business, thinking that business can also do fraudulent transactions because we expect that business doesn't go unchecked. But what we see at Steinhoff is an entire business, an entire organization, and as you said, a monster of an organization that was captured because a board went unchecked. And when I say captured, the extent of fraud that took place and the amount of management that was involved in covering the fraud. And important for me is when a board or even the financial statements go unquestioned, you leave people with thinking they can get away with anything. I looked a bit at the financial statements and I did a bit of reading about what people were saying about it, and no one questioned why budgets are just being met, why forecasts are so accurate. Financial statements only talked about the good story. It didn't talk about, well, where's the debt coming from and how am I going to repay it? And I think there was one analyst that questioned it. And that analyst was sort of pushed aside and said, no, but there's nothing in the financial statements that talk about what you're alarming us to. And so where I'm sitting today and my role as a technical accountant, I always question, and what I tell my team very often is to say, I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right. And so when I look at financial statements, I'm asking, what is the right story? What should we be telling? And I think that is what went unchecked, is that it was just a narrative that everyone bought into and no one questioned it. Whether the questioning came from the auditors, whether the questioning came from the board, whether the questioning came from the shareholders, I think everyone relied on each other. Now, I'm sure the auditors would have looked at it. I'm sure the directors would have looked at it. I'm sure shareholders would have looked at it. I'm sure the analysts would have picked it up. But there was the big gap. No one actually checked it. No one questioned it. And so for me, this conversation is important because I hope that when we have the conversation and you sit in front of management, you question. And it's difficult as auditors, and I'm going to talk because I'm an auditor in the room, to audit intent. You cannot audit intent. What do we audit? We audit supporting evidence. Mm-hmm. But you have to question why management is doing and how does it link up to their strategy and what is it that they're trying to achieve. And so that's why this is important for me today.
So I like the idea of holding people accountable and as professionals, whether you're an auditor, an accountant or internal auditor or whatever, there's certain standards that you need to meet and professional skepticism goes throughout. Mm. So I look forward to that discussion. Thank you very much. Prem.
Thank you, Jaco. I think I'm going to throw a different spin on this. I think, again, I fully agree as directors, we have a fiduciary responsibility, and obviously we need time. We need time to be able to interrogate the packs that are given to us. But by the same token, we also need the kind of reports, the quality of reports that allow us to make the right decisions. And I find that when it comes to these star-studded boards, as I call them, you'll find the same names cropping up over and over again. People who take on all of this responsibility, one wonders, where do they have the time to fulfill their obligations? And, I'm really glad that we have Parmi in the room, because, one of the questions, one of the things I always marvel at is that when you meet a board or somebody who's had board experience or who sits on boards, they will very proudly tell you about all the boards and committees that they sit on. I mean, it's exhausting even listening to it, and one wonders how much of time are they giving to interrogating their packs and asking the right questions. And for me, I think there should be some kind of guidance, or I don't know how one implements this, but there should be a cutoff point at which you should be accepting these appointments. It's not a question of pride, it's a question of doing what you are supposed to be doing. But having said that, we can talk about Steinhoff as much as we want. No one remembers what it's done to people who lost all their retirement savings, the impact that it's had on people's lives. All that gets forgotten, and the same board directors go on to other boards, other work that they can do, and unfortunately, the impact that it's had on people is forgotten. And for me, I think that's the saddest part of the Steinhoff debacle.
So I want to keep to asking you the following question, then we'll work back. Parmi alluded, as well as Melanie, to the fact that there's different role plays in an organization. It's not only the board. We've got shareholders, but we've got staff as well. So skill sets, and you made comments on that as well, has got a massive impact on whether a company is driven effectively or not. From a SAIPA perspective and from an executive perspective, how important is skill sets within an organization? And I want to directly refer here to the IIA, who referenced the case against the head of internal audit, was a chartered accountant. And the question was asked, according to what standards do you hold a person accountable? CA standards with SAICA or IIA standards in the position that you hold? How important is that? And also how important is it to have the right skilled people at board level asking relevant questions?
Extremely important. Extremely, extremely important. People think that if you're a chartered director, you have all the answers. If you're a CA, you have all the answers. But remember, serving on a board means that there are different things that come to light. It's not just about the finances. It's not just about the governance. I think the skills that are required can be sourced from all of the professions. An engineer can play a role. Human resources specialists can play a role. Certainly attorneys and advocates can as well. What about the actuaries? They actually bring a whole new perspective onto a board. So in my view, if you really want to have an all-encompassing oversight function, then you cannot just limit it to the skills that are needed for that particular company. And I'll use SAIPA as an example. I mean, yes, we are a professional body for accountants. It doesn't mean that we only want professional accountants serving on our board. We need the other skills. We need the analytical skills that an engineer may bring, or that an actuary can bring. I do believe that it's absolutely essential.
So I want to move on with that trend, Madelie, in asking the question. When we look at the report that was released by the University of Stellenbosch Business School, they indicated that during the findings the whole time, the auditors actually underplayed the wording. So they were dealing with irregularities, financial irregularities, and irregular expenditure, and not using the words that actually should be worded, and that's being fraudulent activities. Why is that? That we see more and more people don't want to use the right wording and want to peddle around here, whereas we need to go deep through audits and do the right thing and get to the, once you've got the factual information, say it as it is.
Yeah, call a spade a spade.
Yes.
I think it's difficult when you sit in those conversations, and I've been in conversations that, you know, you've got your spidey sense that something's not right, and you have something like professional decorum. Okay? I can't sit in front of the board of directors and say, this is it, there's fraud. And I'll tell you why I say it. Because as an auditor, you work on reasonable assurance. You do not have evidence that this is fraud. And we are taught to use the words, it might appear like, because we want to give management the opportunity to provide their side of the story, to provide the evidence. And actually, it's quite interesting because the financial statements that was published after this whole debacle, 2017 was restated, management spoke about accounting irregularities. They still didn't speak about fraud, because fraud is tested in court, I suppose. So just coming back to the point, I think it's a very difficult point to sit and say, I have evidence that this is fraud. I know that you are committing fraudulent activities. All I have gathered in my entire audit is reasonable assurance to understand whether the financial statements are materially misstated because of fraud. I haven't gone and detected all kinds of fraud. So I think that's why, as auditors, you're reluctant to call a spade, but I must say, I've been in conversations where you are pushed to the point, and I think that's where Deloitte was, is they were pushed, and they said, but give me the evidence, to the point where they could have no other conversation with the board but to say, you need to look at this. And I think there was a 15-page slide deck that was prepared to the board just before the whole Steinhoff thing collapsed, where they said, this appears like fraudulent activities. We want the board to interrogate this. And I think it's only really a forensic auditor that can come in and say, this is fraud, because the forensic auditor is the one with the skills.
And that's what happened with PwC. They actually came forward and said that. No, I agree 100% with you. The last question I want to link to that one. Do you think it's the work of an auditor to look for fraud?
The elephant in the room, I suppose. Let me tell you what is the auditor's responsibility. And I wrote it down because I knew you were going to ask me this. So auditors are required to specifically assess the risk of material misstatement due to fraud and error in every audit. That is their responsibility. But their responsibility is framed in concepts like materiality and reasonable assurance. So is the auditor responsible to detect any kind of fraud? Absolutely not. The auditor is responsible to detect material misstatement due to fraud. It's very different than detecting fraud. Principles are different. The evidence that you are looking for is different.
I agree 100% with you, and the reason for that is why we fought so hard for King 4, to understand and to recognize the specialization field when we look at fraud and fraud audits, forensic accounting, and those type of things, which have they've incorporated in King 4, taking that responsibility, that total responsibility away from internal audit, and giving it now to fraud examiners, which, by the way, is a profession that, together with the SAIPA, we've created forensic accounting, and we are going to look at forensic auditing standards. Something that we're very proud of, because that is a specific technical skill set that's desperately needed. Professor, and then I'll get to you, Parmi.
Sounds so ominous.
Yeah.
No, it's not ominous. Steinhoff made use of a two-tier board, having executive and non-executives at the different levels. Although all the fraud was perpetrated under the one-tier approach, where everyone was sitting as non-executive and executives as one tier, they decided thereafter to move to a two-tier approach. What do you think is the advantages and the disadvantages of the two systems?
So the first is to ask ourselves the question, but why do you need a board in the first place? And in simple English, it's oversight. It's governance, it's probity, it's stewardship, it's the duty of care, skill, and diligence. The one that is less sexy to talk about is the duty of faith. And we talk about directors executing their fiduciary responsibility. This is defined in the Companies Act, but I love the PFMA's definition, because I think it's much clearer. It says, fiduciary responsibility is acting in the best interest of the entity, and not in the best interest of the shareholders, nor in the best interest of the employees. That's very clear. Christo Visa, at the end of this expose, the biggest in the history of this country, where I agree people lost their livelihoods. Also because of greed, they sold their farms because they were promised you will double your return in less than 5 years. And they saw the exponential growth of this company. Says, it was clear that there is no way that Marcus Jooste could have been acting on his own. It's an ecosystem. It's called combined assurance for a reason, because I depend on the piece of work you've done and the piece of work she's done, so that I put them together and say, what type of picture is this telling me? And then you come to a determination. What keeps boards awake at night or allows them to sleep better is the 4 control functions. One is risk management. The second is compliance. The third is on internal audit, and if you are a financial services entity, on actuarial. Like a Swiss cheese model, it is highly unlikely that the first line of defense will miss it, and the second and the third without the fourth catching it. That's what makes us sleep better at night. When you sit in a board, it's because you look around and say, there's 8 of us. So if I've missed something, I'm hoping that I'll do my bit, and you will know that you'll also have done your bit. But in the Steinhoff case, it was clear that people were acting in concert, and some of them materially benefited. Lanzerek gets sold to Marcus Jooste for shares. The person that came out of this smelling like roses is Yanni Mouton, because he was part of that shareholding entity, gets elbowed out, by Christo himself because he loves absolute control. And he, very sad face, gets out of that. Less than 6 months, then he thanks his lucky stars to say, I could have lost all my money with those thugs and hooligans. But because I was fired, I took my money, and he decided to thank his Jehovah and start a foundation and retire and leave the company to pit. Lastly, of course, the laws sometimes is very explicit and very clear. In financial services, the Prudential Authority says you cannot serve on more than 4 listed entities. The limit. The Prudential Authority says you can serve on the board as long as you want, but after 9 years, you can no longer refer yourself to as independent. Call yourself anything else, but you can't be independent because by that time you've become part of the furniture. So I think in the final analysis, we need to call these things what they are at the slightest risk and the evidence at hand. It's not impropriety and malfeasance. It's stealing.
We can talk about this for the whole day. We can talk about transparency, governance, and the rest. Last question to you, Parmi, before we need to end the session. USTA was described as a charismatic CEO, sorry for that, who seemingly manipulated the board and their findings. How do you believe should the board be structured to ensure that this never happens again? And what changes to the board composition could have been made to ensure better compliance?
Yeah, so you refer to charismatic CEO. I've seen other words: dominant CEO, arrogant CEO, powerful CEO, CEO who thinks they are bigger than the board.
Well, let's keep to my term.
This is, I mean, this is all about a balance of power, right? In any governance structure, you have shareholders who appoint a board of directors. Those board of directors are answerable to those shareholders on how they fulfill their duties. Similarly, you have a board of directors appointing management who should be, in an ideal situation, accountable to the board of directors. But when you have a CEO that's such a larger-than-life personality, that CEO is almost cherry-picking who his board members will be and who he will be accountable to. You've got a serious problem in balance of power. You've got a serious problem in culture within that organization. How could it have been fixed? Prof. Bonang already was talking about independence, right? True independence, not independence on paper because you don't tick one of those things in King 4 that says there may be an independence problem, then you say, no, I'm okay. I don't tick any of those, I'm okay, I'm independent. True independence. An independent chair is one of the most critical things to hold a CEO accountable. Christo Wiese, and I've seen if you read Steinheist or even in the documentaries, he referred to Marcus as a second son to him. If that was the case, if they were that close in this relationship, how could he have been overseeing the CEO, the performance of the CEO and his team with a level of confidence and credibility from the marketplace? It's almost unfathomable. The other thing we talk about on boards is diversity. And when you say the word diversity, people are thinking different races, different ages, and different genders. But that's not what the issue was here, or not what I'm referring to. I mean, there were people of different races and there were people of different ages and genders on this board. But how diverse are you as a group if you have the same interests, the same social circles, you're all meeting at the horse racing on the weekend? Are you really diverse, or is there now a buddy mentality which results in groupthink? And I think groupthink was one of the biggest issues here. It was somebody says something and everyone was just automatically agree. No one had a diverse view on this board to say, hang on, have we missed something here? Are we sure we're making the right decision? And this is why we talk about diversity being so important. And then the last thing is to really think about CEO tenure. What is the length of time? I mean, we speak about non-executives, right? 9 years, and you sort of start to question whether they're too familiar with the organization or they're still independent. But what is the reasonable tenure to have someone in such a powerful position at the helm of an organization? I don't have an answer to that question, but
we've got a guidance paper.
we've got many guidance papers on
Called
many
King
of these
4.
things. But the trouble is, when somebody's in that organization for that long, they learn to manipulate the system and manipulate everyone around them. And that's how they remain unchecked and never feel accountable to anyone else. So it's also important for boards to consider, even if it seems like your CEO is performing, when is the right time to make a change? It's also a bit of a red flag when the company keeps performing and the share price keeps going up, as you said. And it's easy now. Now we have all the investors and analysts up in arms about what happened in Steinhoff. But they were also happy to invest their money in Steinhoff because the share price was increasing and they were getting their dividends. They also weren't asking questions about how is this possible? You know, what is actually going on here?
I look forward to that new program. Philip told me that it's coming out tomorrow, Steinheist on Showmax, I believe. So I look forward to seeing how it evolves from the first one on Netflix. After the PwC investigation, I think there's a lot coming out there. A lot of things that was blatant, but never questions asked.
A handwritten note, for example.
Yes.
A handwritten invoice.
And not only that, if a CEO starts manipulating the system to pay his own salaries and bonuses.
In advance.
So those type of things, there's red flags that should have been there. There's red flags that talks about the notes that you spoke of, the over-evaluation of products, the companies that he spoke about it, the companies that you buy that's far in debt, and a month or two later, then suddenly they make a profit. How do you suddenly turn around something like this? I want to end asking all the questions, you all the same question. Shareholding at one stage dropped as far as 55,000%. I had a look on the system to hit rock bottom. So the shares, I think they turned around at 19 cents later on, and now they're back to 50 cents. Can the company's operational integrity and reputation be salvaged? If I can start with you.
The answer is yes. That's why you have turnaround specialists. The answer is yes. That's why you have an entire commerce that buys failing companies. You put in the work, you turn them around. Over a period of time, they can indeed be profitable. The answer is yes, but you have to focus on the right things. And those right things go down to, but what does a CEO really do? Number one, it's people. Two, it's culture. Number three is about reputation management, because you have to care about that. The fourth is the relationship management. The numbers will come. If you do these four, they've never failed not to come. On the one hand, you have to look at, but in a crisis, how then do you respond? Crisis management also starts with people. It says we always try and remember the people involved. Number two, it says tell the truth. The third, it says tell the whole truth. The last one says tell it fast.
Parmi?
Yeah.
I have to agree with my brother Bonang here. For me, I mean, we've seen organizations turn around. We've seen other organizations in deep despair and are able to bounce back. And how do they do it? They do it through a change in leadership and a change in culture. They do it through meaningful action, not just PR speak, but human beings who are interacting with organizations. You have a feel for what's real and what's not real and what's authentic. And what's just written by marketing people. And so I think it can happen if the right intention is there and the right steps are taken.
Madelie?
I have a different view. My view is no, because it never survives in its original form. Whatever was there changes, and it changes significantly. What happened with Steinhoff is they went through delisting. You're no longer the same entity. They sold off majority of their assets. You're no longer the same entity. You changed your boards. You don't have the same board. You don't have the same culture. So the name might survive. The operations to an extent might survive. But the company, the what that is, doesn't survive. The shareholders, I think, drop it like it's hot. And they come back when they think, okay, things seem to be under control. And they never invest in the same entity again. So for me, even looking at, at my own clients who've gone through huge restructurings, because of, events that occurred, you never look at them the same either.
No, we've seen it with EOH and Siemens and the others. So,
Yeah.
Prem?
I think my answer is both yes and no.
You've got the luxury of listening to all.
Remember, trust is earned.
Yes.
To use Coronation's key line. Trust is earned, and unfortunately, when trust is broken, it's very, very difficult to repair that. I have to agree with my learned colleague here that the organization may make a comeback, but it's never going to be the same. And why should it be the same? If it's had stuff that it needed to shed, it must do that. And it's almost as if it needs to be born again. Because, and why I think it's important is that public trust is very important. We cannot afford to lose public trust, shareholder trust. And the other reason is that there are people whose livelihoods depend on these companies. And it's so important that even if they rebrand themselves and come back looking younger, smarter, stronger, even if they're smaller, remember, they will continue to contribute towards the economy and to our communities.
I want to thank you all for being here, for partaking this very important discussion. We've run out of time. I want to thank the delegates for listening, and thank you very much for sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Join the conversation on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube using #ThinkGovernancePodcast.